Commonwealth of the Bahamas is a country containing 29 islands, 661 keys, and over 2,000 islets. Christopher Columbus first landed here in 1492. After the Spanish shipped the natives off to slavery, the islands were mostly deserted for the next 250 years, until 1650, when British colonists from Bermuda began settling the islands. After the American Revolutionary War, thousands of pro-British loyalists and African slaves moved to the Bahamas. Slavery was eventually abolished, but the descendants of enslaved and liberated Africans create the majority of the Bahamas population today. The mere mention of the Bahamas seems to equate itself with tourism. Most people would be hard-pressed to think of any other industries or notable facts about the islands. This is understandable considering the economy of the Bahamas is heavily dependent on tourism. 60% of the gross domestic product is provided by the tourism industry. Tourism also employs more than half of the Bahamian workforce. Manufacturing and agriculture together contribute only a tenth of the GDP and show little growth despite government incentives aimed at those sectors. 80% of their food must be imported since the agriculture industry is so small. Most of the food they do produce is local seafood. Growth prospects heavily depend on the tourism sector, which depends on growth in the U.S. since the U.S. provides 80% of their visitors. Many of these visitors come to Nassau on cruise ships. The Bahamian government recently spent $50 million dredging the harbor to accommodate the arrival of one of the first of Royal Caribbean's mega cruise ships, Oasis of the Seas. They spend millions of dollars each year in advertising to persuade Americans to come visit their tropical paradise. A major contribution to the recent growth in the overall Bahamian economy is the Atlantis Resort and Casino, which took over the former Paradise Island Resort and has provided a much-needed boost to the economy. The Atlantis Resort is a massive tribute to luxury and relaxation, but of course this is not the case in all of Nassau. A short drive across the bridge and past the first few streets of souvenir shops shows a sharp contrast. There is a lot less paradise and more of a crumbling infrastructure. In November, I visited Nassau, the capital of the Bahamas. Here I had the opportunity to meet a few local workers in the tourism industry. Immediately after stepping onto the island, local vendors enthusiastically tried to sell trinkets and souvenirs, tours of the island, taxi rides to Atlantis, and hair braiding. I met Charlene working in this little open-air cabana. She has been braiding hair here on the island for tourists for over 20 years. The 46 ladies working here have an interesting system for the money they earn. They put the payments in a bucket, keeping the tip for themselves. When the bucket reaches $100, it goes to whichever lady is next in line for her $100. While many of the ladies sat around playing cards and waiting for their turn to get $100, Charlene was quick to seek the business of both me and my sister. She put my $10 fee in the bucket and kept the $5 tip. It was a steep price for a single braid, but I was happy to have my hair out of my face and contribute to the local economy at the same time. Charlene is a single mother of 4 children and makes enough money braiding hair to afford a modest 2-bedroom apartment for $500 a month. Her family has lived on Nassau for as far back as she can remember. Now her daughter is learning to braid hair and hangs out with her mom at the braiding hut when she's not in school. You can imagine how Charlene's business would falter if there were not thousands of cruise ship passengers strolling by her hut each day, looking for fun conversation, a little bit of culture, or just a fun tourist trap to give their money to. After exploring the island a bit, we decided to check out Atlantis. Jimmy drove us over there in his taxi. Jimmy is married with 2 daughters. He went to private school as a child and now pays $1,100 per term for his daughters to attend private school as well. He used to drive a taxi for a local company, but now he has had his own taxi for 4 years. He, along with most of the other taxi drivers, charges $4 a person for a one-way trip to Atlantis. That day, he paid $4.70 just for a gallon of gas. He explained how it is rather expensive to live in Nassau because they must import everything. They don't have factories, oil refineries, or large farms, so food, gas, and most other merchandise is very expensive. So expensive that he actually takes a trip to Miami every 4 months and buys his family groceries from Sam's Club in bulk. He puts the food and toiletries on a boat and brings it home to his family. This is much cheaper for him than to buy all the necessary items on Nassau. He commented that the last few years were rough on his business because of the economic downturn in the United States. Many tourists had already paid for their cruise to the Bahamas, so they were still arriving in Nassau, but they were unwilling to pay any extra money for taxis or souvenirs. This dealt a tough blow to their economy and was complicated by hundreds of Haitian earthquake refugees. He was optimistic about the future though, since more Americans were spending money on the island and things were starting to pick up again.